Welcome back. Now, before we took that brief advertising break, I promised you that we could look at briefly converting figurative language into literal. Now, we all know what a simile is. It's a direct comparison that contains the word like or as. And I've given you an example here. These books are as tatty as a flea-bitten dog with mange. What is that in literal language? Well, it means simply, these books are very tatty. That's all there is to it. Let's try another one, a metaphor, a direct comparison without the use of like or as. He is a raging bull on the rugby field. What is that literally? He plays rugby aggressively. That's all there is to it. We're converting it from figurative to literal. Let's take a look at the next one. Personification. Giving human qualities to non-human things. There's your example. The clouds looked down on the thirsty earth and began to weep. What does that actually mean? It started to rain. That's all there is to it. Shall we try a few more? I think it's a good idea. Irony. The opposite of what is stated is understood. And there we have, it's absolutely wonderful to be in detention on a Saturday. Whereas the speaker is saying, I hate this. There we are, condensed down to 3 words with the literal meaning. Another one, sarcasm, irony used in a nasty and offensive way. For example, you must be so proud of having failed every one of your subjects. Any teacher says that to any of my children, he'll get a swift kick up his, I can't remember the words. Literally, you are academically weak. That's all there is to it. Hyperbole is a gross exaggeration. And then we've got the example. I think we've been in this exam hall for 20 years already. This exam is going slowly. Down to 4 words. Very simple to do if you just practice it. Litotes is the use of a negative and an opposite to understate what is intended. And there I've given you the example. He is not much like Rambo. In other words, Rambo, big, muscular. He is a wimp. Ha ha ha. Next one, euphemism. Often used, and I hate euphemism. I'm starting a campaign on Facebook to have euphemism cancelled and made illegal. Otherwise, we'll classify it as the same evil thing as shooting lions. Okay, euphemism, expressing an unpleasant situation in a tactful and less abrupt manner. And you've got that example. He passed peacefully and quietly from this world into the next. He died. Of course, it's much less tactful when you say he died, but it's the literal meaning. Innuendo is hinting at something without stating it directly. And here you have an example which I got from my kind brother. It seems to me as if all these assignments were downloaded from the same website. You all cheated. Enough about figurative language. I'm sure you get the idea here, people. What it's about is changing it from the figurative into the literal so that you clarify meaning. And the poem in particular, where that is so important, is the surf. But we're not looking at the surf yet. Let me see if I can go. There we are, 5 poems. This is the one we wanted. Okay, our next poem is The Birth of Shaka, and it's Mbuyiseni Oswald Mchali. Let us then conjure up onto the screen using this electronic trickery what we want here. And I'm told I can scroll down. Let me see if this will... Ah! It's getting better and better. Look at that. Isn't that brilliant? I'm also told I can decrease the size so it all fits onto the screen. I really am enjoying this new equipment. Really, this is fantastic. And I cannot thank the production crew enough for showing me all these wonderful electronic tips. Let us read through this poem together. His baby cry was of a cub tearing the neck of the lioness because he was fatherless. The gods boiled his blood in a clay pot of passion to course in his veins. His heart was shaped into an ox shield to foil every foe. Ancestors forged his muscles into thongs as tough as wattle bark and nerves as sharp as syringa thorns. His eyes were lanterns that shone from the dark valleys of Zululand to see white swallows coming across the sea. His cry to two assassin brothers, "Lo, you can kill me, but you'll never rule this land." And wasn't that just the truth? So a lot of what we would say truisms being stated here, but specifically lots and lots of figurative language of the African style. Now, let's go back then, see what we've got here. And here are my notes that I've given you on the birth of Shaka. Firstly, the poet. He grew up during the apartheid era and was thus, as a black man, of course, treated as an inferior person. He was, in fact, working for some time as a messenger for a white-owned company. He was a messenger inside Soweto. So obviously, this whole time would have disturbed him. Who wants to be an inferior person, especially if you have a sharp mind? Because today, of course, he's a professor over in the United States. Now here you've got when and why the poem was published. It was in fact published in Sounds of a Cowhide Drum. It was his anthology, which was published in 1971. And this obviously is an acknowledgement of the greatness of Shaka. Certainly, Shaka must be regarded as one of the greatest of African leaders. But I shall come to that point a little bit later, once we've looked more deeply at an analysis of this poem. Now here, the theme. Only the most powerful of leaders could have withstood colonialization. Or could they? Very often, history is created and written by the people with the best weapons. Would the Zulu have been able to withstand the coming of the white man if Shaka had still been their leader? Or would Blood River still have happened? They hadn't changed their tactics at the Battle of Blood River. And that was the first time where the great breaking of the Zulu nation came through a military defeat. The form, it's 6 stanzas, but no formal structure. Enjambment is used within each stanza to keep it moving. The diction, many typically African words and phrases used, your cowhide shield and your clay pot, etc., etc. We'll look at that in a bit more detail in a minute. The tone is dramatic and admiring. Obviously, there is no rhyme. You know that already. Then we go on to our rhythm. And this poem to me seems as if it was translated out of Zulu. Now, it wasn't. It was written as an English poem. But I think that the poet deliberately did it in that style to make it sound as if the speaker, the person reading the poem, is in fact born as a Zulu. The imagery, of course, you've got all these metaphors used to show how Shaka was formed from birth to be one of the ultimate Africans. An Iron Man, a Superman, a Batman. No, it's Shaka, a person created by supernatural means to be above the crowd, to be a superb leader. Okay, sorry, I've jumped a little bit ahead there. I want to comment. Let's go back and look at the poem itself. The first thing we've got, his baby cry. It's interesting that when a baby is born, they have been inside the mother for 9 months. Their lungs are full of the fluid, the amniotic fluid, and now suddenly they are forced to start breathing. Their oxygen is no longer coming from an umbilical cord. So it's a painful experience for a baby to be born, just as it is a painful experience for the mother, because the lungs are being exposed to air for the first time. They now have to start working. It's a shock. And you've got here this metaphor. His baby cry was of a cub, a lion cub, tearing tearing the neck of the lioness because he was fatherless. Now, of course, he wasn't fatherless. He had a father. But the father had chased away the mother. And this is one of the factors which Shaka never forgot. It had a huge effect on shaping his life. Because he was regarded as of low birth by the rest of the tribe at the time, he made it his mission in life to take over that tribe. A very funny line, by the way, in one of the essays. This is an example of tautology. I am the child of 2 parents. Yes, we are all the children of 2 parents. So he was not literally fatherless, but he grew up without a father figure, which was why he stayed so devoted to his mother through most of his life. We go on to our second stanza, if you can call it a stanza here. The gods. Now, immediately pause there. We, the white English South African people, as a general rule, are Christians, and I am a typical example of that. I am a sincerely believing Christian, and I am a monotheist. I do not believe in a pantheon or a variety of gods. I believe in the God Yahweh, and of course in his son Yeshua. But here you've got reference to the gods. And it says, they boiled his blood in a clay pot of passion, enthusiasm, extremism to course in his veins. Well, that's not such a surprise, because my blood courses in my veins also. So there is, well, I shall look at that no further until I comment a bit later. His heart was shaped into an ox shield. A very effective shield, by the way. Uncured or improperly cured leather becomes extremely hard and makes it almost impossible for a spear to pass through it. And when you have made a shield out of layer after layer after layer of salted leather, you've got a shield that is really effective. And of course, those of you who have seen a Zulu shield, it's long. It stretches for about 2 meters from the ground up to above the head. It really is an effective way to protect yourself against the spears of an enemy. And there, his heart was shaped into an ox shield to foil every foe. Well, he never really foiled every foe. There's a little bit of a contradiction here, because he's got his assassin brothers, which you look at there in the 5th stanza. So, no, well, it wasn't every foe, it was most foes. Unfortunately, his brothers did conspire to kill him. Then we carry on. Another part of African culture, ancestors. Ancestors forged his muscles into thongs. All right. Now, thongs are made out of leather. It is essentially string made out of leather. It is extremely tough. And it's potent, especially when the strands of leather are then plaited together to form an even stronger and more flexible cord. Right, as tough as wattle bark, strings of bark can very often be used. Willow bark is another good example of that, by the way. It makes quite good strings. And nerves, as sharp as syringa thorns. There's a simile, okay, as tough as sharp as, in both cases there, similes being used instead of the normal metaphors. His eyes were lanterns, we're back to the similes now, that shone from the dark valleys of Zululand. Okay, dark valleys of Zululand. We all think immediately of the Valley of 1,000 Hills, an incredibly beautiful and green part of this country of ours. I really do appreciate those sorts of scenes. To see what? White swallows. Now, we have here a metaphor for the sailing ships that the Europeans used in those days. They had, of course, many sails up top on these long masts. And to the first-time observer, they would have to find a way of describing these strange objects coming towards them across the water with what looked like white swallows, the wings of swallows stuck above them, the sails. That was how it was described then. We've got them as coming across the sea, right? And then his cry to two assassin brothers. Assassin brothers. That's an amazing word, that. What is an assassin? It comes originally from an Arabic word. Now, in South Africa, of course, we have a plant called matakwani. The active ingredient of matakwani, in English, that is cannabis sativa, and the active ingredient of cannabis sativa is tetrahydrocannabinol 2,5. That is THC, or also known as the resin. That is the intoxicating component of the substance. And in Arabic countries, they have learned how to extract the resin to make a pure version of the substance, and they call that hashish. And traditionally, the assassins were murderers who would smoke this hashish before they went out to kill people, and they were called the hashishin. In English today, that hashishin has been anglicized into the word assassin. Okay. So his cry to his two assassin brothers who sneaked up behind him and stabbed him with their spears, or gave the order for him to be stabbed. Lo, you can kill me, but you'll never rule this land. And those words were true until very recently. Until, in fact, somewhere around 2008, when we got a different president as a result of our former president, Thabo Mbeki, was ousted by the new president, Jacob Zuma, and for the first time, we had a Zulu-born leader of this country. It had never happened before that a Zulu would lead the whole of South Africa. Yes, they reigned in Zululand and places like that, but not in South Africa. Now let me add a few comments here. Let's talk about great African leaders. Let me not deny that Shaka was a great leader, but I do not by any means regard him as the greatest. Before you stand up and scream at me that I am opposing African leaders, no, I'm not. To my mind, the greatest African leader that we have had here in this country is King Moshoeshoe I of the Basotho. He was a powerful military leader. Nobody can deny that. But he was a cunning political statesman who knew when it was a time to fight and when it was a time to employ diplomacy in order to keep his country unified and stable. That, to me, is the greatest of leaders. The second, of course, I would say Jan Smuts, Jan Christian Smuts. Also a brilliant leader, both on the battlefield. He was a commando leader during the Boer War from 1900 up to 1902. He was led the most effective commando all over the country. And then, of course, he became a Prime Minister of South Africa, the overall leader. And he was appointed a Field Marshal by various European countries during World War I. Then we have number 3, sorry about this, Nelson Mandela, the great Nelson Mandela, who unified this country and brought it onto a stable footing after apartheid was dismantled by F.W. de Klerk. So where does Shaka come in all this? Certainly important, but to my mind, far less important than the various people who had such a great effect on South Africa today. And we look at a few other little things here. Do I like this poem? Well, I must be quite honest. I regard this poem as overdone. The second stanza, I look at this, the gods boiled his blood in a clay pot of passion. Isn't that a bit extravagant? Isn't that a bit extreme? It's certainly a metaphor. It certainly gives you some idea of what they did to his blood. But I keep getting this phrase popping into my mind that, the gods boiled his brains in blood. It just, to me, seems overdone. It's a little bit exaggerated. And we've got this heart was shaped into an ox shield to foil every foe, which just 2 stanzas later, of course, is contradicted when he gets murdered. And then, of course, you've got his muscles, forged his muscles into thongs as tough as the wattle bark. Here I've got another problem. Is wattle indigenous? I thought wattle came from Australia. Is this an appropriate simile to use in a really very African poem? As sharp as syringa thorns. Not too sure about that. Is that also an indigenous tree? I hope so, but I don't think so. You see the problem that I have with this. Okay, and then of course you've got the eyes shining from those beautiful dark valleys of Zululand, and what do they see? They see those ships approaching, and he is of course even at that stage pointing out that there's going to be a downfall of the Zulu nation, which occurs. We had the Battle of Blood River in 1838, when about 5,000 Zulu warriors were defeated by this Boer laager, which had only, I think, 2 people wounded or something like that. But that wasn't the worst. The worst came just after Isandlwana. Isandlwana took place in 1879, when the British force under Lord Chelmsford was wiped out by the Zulu impi. And they did a very good job of it. But immediately, because of that, the British sent bigger, greater forces, better equipped and protected. And, of course, King Cetshwayo, or Cetshwayo, I'm not too sure how to pronounce that correctly, was captured and exiled. He wasn't allowed to go back to Zululand, and effectively, that was the end of the Zulus as a a separate nation. Today, of course, they are part of South Africa, as I am. But I look at this and I say, how accurate is it? My last comment there on colonialism. If some of you have perhaps read Things Fall Apart by Chinua Achebe, I regard that book as the greatest item of African literature. There are none better than that, because it describes the conflict between the white man and the coming of the white man with his Christianity and new ways, and the old established order. And it's so relevant to this poem. If you have not yet read that book, I would encourage you to do so. We have always studied it in grade 11. But it points out that this was inevitable because the white man had machine guns. The white man had powerful rifles. He had the weaponry and he had the tactics. The two things that enabled the forces of the Voortrekkers to conquer the various African tribes that were in place then were the rifle and the horse. They had mobility and they had firepower. Those two things used hand in hand meant that they were virtually unstoppable. So, this final line, "You can kill me, but you'll never rule this land," came true almost in the lifetime of Dingaan, who was one of the assassin brothers, and certainly it came true not too long after it was claimed to have been made. People, we're going to take a break at that point. This is the end of this hour of presentation. When we come back, we shall tackle our final three poems, that is the Surf, Mementos, and Cheetah. And we hope to see you again for the final section of this live broadcast. Thank you.